Hi, John. Good to see you. I came from your stream, which I'm finding it a little strange that you're here when you're still live on your stream. But never mind, miracles do happen, don't they? Today I saw two videos. I think they're quite important. One of them was Richard Spencer talking to Joel Davis about Western identity, and the other one was Mark Collett discussing a video by Simon Webb, a journalist and a writer, talking about patriotic alternative. So Joel Davis is an Australian and Richard Spencer an American, and it's great that communications are so good that we can easily watch people from opposite ends of the globe discussing what they think is a common future. Mainly, they spoke about US foreign policy more than they spoke about Western identity, which is certainly very fluid and, well, uncertain. It's not that Westerners don't have an identity, it's just that they don't like it. And the main point of the conversation, of the titled stream, was not discussed. Perhaps it was easier to talk about US foreign policy, about the Anglosphere and the different power blocks of the EU and NATO and Russia and Ukraine, than to actually talk about Western identity. I answered this question a few days ago, I think, when I said white identity is Western identity. Western identity is a product of Christianity and liberalism. But Christianity and liberalism are failing, and for that reason, we are in the West being subject to all kinds of uncomfortable feelings, to the extent of having problems with our self-esteem, and as well as mental health issues for many people, because self-esteem is a great part of good mental health when we have it. So, disappointingly, Western identity was not discussed, but apart from what I said, what else, what more could be said about it? And I think for all national narratives, there will always be, well, an actual narrative. We are the people who did this. It's usually war and revolution. National identity is forged in the furnace of war and revolution. We don't want a Third World War. We don't want a violent revolution. And I think there are ways of achieving our goals without any nastiness if the ruling classes are prepared to listen. There was talk of the unlikelihood of the political classes in the West listening to marginalized communities such as nationalists. But I think this problem can be surmounted if you have a message If you have a message, then you can convey it. It's only when you don't have a message that makes anything said completely pointless. So not only have you got to say where it's hurting, you've got to say why it's hurting, and you've got to tell the government what it is it can do to stop the pain. And so far there's been no consideration about this part of the communication at all. I know this has been discussed in national circles. I know Millennial Webb was talking about possibly just asking the government to give them what they want. I don't know if there's been any attempt at all to do this, and well, who would they talk to? Their local MP? I think not. It wouldn't be enough just to talk to your local MP, I suspect. So this is whatever this solution that you want them to implement, you have to say it with one voice, with convincing clarity, and with somebody who is prepared to do it in person, a representative. It can't be just some indistinguishable mumbling of discontent. It has to be a clear message. You have to say where it's hurting, why it's hurting, and how to stop it. And there's been no attempt to say it at all. And as for the identitarian issues, I think this causes unnecessary emotional anguish, because there's still this desire to blame certain groups of people and to exclude them. And I don't think at this stage it is useful or tactical to exclude certain groups. I know they have a tendency to blame Jews and want to exclude Muslims because they don't like them. And this is why I think this theory of everything, that is the nature and purpose and narrative of the Abrahamic God, is so useful. And unless this idea, or even power, if God exists, is invoked, I don't think anything will happen. So when Mark Collett was concerned, he was telling people, well, not to get too annoyed with Simon Webb, who made a video saying the British will never, ever choose a fringe party, so forget about it. Or will they? If they're sufficiently upset. Or if the terms of the question were made sufficiently clear, such as the EU referendum. So clarity is all, and brevity is part of clarity. I think I'm one of the better communicators around. I think I make my point. I repeat my point, and I think on the whole people know what I'm saying, because I haven't backed down from my position that the problem in the West is its breakdown, is the breakdown of its moral and political system. And this means that the morals of the government and the governed are completely unregulated. I know there are laws, and the laws are still on the whole enforced, but it's not enough to create a sense of order, of justice, of, well, generally a feeling of things being fair enough. Increasingly, people do not think that things are fair enough. They do not feel that their government cares about them or that it even knows what it is doing. Today, or should I say yesterday morning, I heard about the millions of pounds being spent on the war in Ukraine, and we already know it has led to higher prices, energy and food, and there will be other unpleasant consequences to come. So what is to be done? I don't think there is any point fighting elections. It is, well, a waste of time, since you never get anywhere, if Simon Webb is correct, or it will just take too long. We've just had local elections. The next one is sometime before 2025. Why do we have to wait for the next election before the problem even begins to be addressed? Surely, if there's a problem, it should be dealt with as soon as possible. And I'm saying that the problem is democracy itself. But that is a sacred cow, a conceptual idol, in fact. So, unless we get over this hurdle, nothing much will be done. If you're still talking about, fighting elections, you don't understand the problem. You still don't get it. And if you can't bring yourself to say that democracy is damaged, or even dementia, then you haven't got the wherewithal to say what needs to be said, let alone do what needs to be done. So we have censorship everywhere. I still only have one viewer. I choose to believe that I should have more, and that I'm being suppressed, or my notifications are not going out, or there are, well, I suppose it's perfectly possible that people prefer to go elsewhere. But having looked at a few of my videos on the YouTube search engine, I suspect that I have been shadow banned. So this could be a good thing or a bad thing. I guess it's a bad thing that I can't be found. It's a good thing that they think I've done enough to get myself shadow banned. But in any case, the people who are associated with nationalism would know who I am and would know what my idea is. They can't bring themselves to acknowledge the power and glory of secular Quranism, even though they haven't got a better idea. And this is precisely the problem of people who don't get it about the fact that if there are two people and they disagree, if they disagree about the problem, then the person with a solution has a higher status than the person who doesn't have a solution and is only complaining. So for that reason, I higher status. I mean, if you're being logical, you wouldn't want to deny it. And of course, there could be, two people with a solution, and then you analyze what the solution is. You see, well, you have to consider whether the problem is correctly diagnosed, and then you go on to check if the solution could work. I notice there is no, not even a hint of people going about doing things methodically. It's all emotion. It's all impractical solutions. Either wait for the Messiah to come or wait for everything to crash and burn, and nothing yes, and wait for the next election and vote your way out of your problems. Obviously, secular Quranism is the middle way. Nobody can bring themselves to discuss it rationally. I try to begin conversations like, what is your religion? Do you consider yourself Christian? What do you think is the purpose of religion? And I think they just, well, I don't get a response. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, obviously it's a bad thing to ask for a response and not get it, but the fact that the person I am asking the question refuses to respond suggests that he knows where it is all leading, and that is why he refuses to engage. So he already knows what my solution is, and he knows he hasn't got a better one, and that's why he's not engaging. So I could be considered to have made my point already, and it's as if I have one, but nobody's prepared to acknowledge it. Why won't they acknowledge it? Is because they are morally degenerate, intellectually dishonest. They can't bring themselves to acknowledge the truth, that they have no better idea, and my diagnosis is correct. So they think it is a viable solution to pretend I never said anything, not discuss the only solution. It's not that there are competing solutions. There is only one solution. There's the solution of voting your way out of this mess. There is the one of waiting for the Messiah to come. There is the one of waiting for everything, law and order to break down, and then taking your revenge on all the people that you want to be revenged on. There is the option of that's a good one. Waiting for your grandchildren to sort the mess out, because the West is the best, right? So there's these four options, and there's mine. I mean, I really, there is no competition. So why can't these men talk about it? I mean, there's all kinds of difficult questions they could ask if they wanted to. The what, who, how, why, but they actually refuse to engage. And I had thought that Joel Davis and Richard Spencer would be a little, they're supposed to be the thought leaders of the alt-right. But they have nothing. But anyway, Western identity, well, it will always be fluid anyway. I mean, we just want it to be stable. We want, the individual narratives of these countries to be, well, something that doesn't induce sort of shame and self-loathing. There's been much talk recently about the number of self-loathing Americans who say things like, I think this was something that Richard Spencer said about, wanting Putin to nuke America because all these American men are just so filled with self-loathing that they just want it to end. It's a kind of it is, yes, they were talking about the death drive, the death instinct. And this is actually something Sam Samuels and I were talking about recently, about suicide by cop. So things are getting quite bad, and it's pretty general. All these Americans who want Putin to win, who just can't stand it anymore. And so this is a kind of spiritual agony that so many Westerners have, that they believe that their leaders are either incompetent, they don't know what they're doing, or they're evil, or they're mad. And they want it to end. And so far, well, most of us still have a roof over our heads, we have food on the table, we know it's getting more expensive. It hasn't yet hit us, but winter will come, and it could be a very cold one. And we have no solutions. Now, we want to, ideally, solve the problem before winter comes. We want everything to be put right as soon as possible. We want to feel that the government knows what it's doing. And the best way, the most peaceful way of doing so would be for someone in government to answer our questions. I know they've been ignoring us all this time, but then nobody has even asked. Nobody has sought an audience with the person in charge. Now, that is technically supposed to be Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, but it could equally be, well, somebody else. I mean, who would I like to talk to? I mean, I would actually like to speak to a lawyer. The person I really most want to talk to would be Lord Sumption, but he's actually retired, but he's of the old school. And I know he's not happy because he's appeared on Unheard, which is a kind of soft dissident right channel. Run by a good-looking man called Freddie something or other. But the problem with the dissident right and its intellectuals is their utter cowardice. So I know they won't had me on to discuss my solution because I just don't think they're capable of discussing it. They can't even enter the room, speaking metaphorically, or the building. So I can only hope for, at this stage, people who say that they care to engage with me on the subject. I know they've shown no willingness to do so. I mean, some of them have even said yes, but obviously they don't want to. They don't want to be the one. They have no arguments. I mean, that's the thing. They have no arguments other than we don't like it, we don't want to, you can't make us. They literally have no arguments. They can't deny that Christianity is kaput because none of them are Christian. They can't deny that liberalism is kaput because none of them are liberals. They can't deny that conservatism is kaput because they're not conservatives. You're only alt-right if you believe that nothing that's on offer in the mainstream parties is going to solve your problem. So they're already out of that loop. And I've already pointed out the options that are open to them, which is to expect voting to solve their problem, to wait for the Messiah to come, to wait for, or in order to break down, and for their grandchildren to solve the problem. So none of them seems very viable. And as far as I know, my solution of secular Quranism is the only one available. I know it's just a theoretical solution, but I don't think that I've misdiagnosed the problem, the illness, the disease. I'm saying that the problem is that Christianity and its replacement of liberalism have failed. I don't think anyone can deny that, and therefore, we've had our chance. You've tried one secular political ideology of liberalism, and you know that in Russia they tried their secular political ideology of communism, and you know that before the end of the Second World War, the Axis powers tried their secular political ideology of fascism and Nazism. So you know they've failed. So there's really only one solution. You're not going to be converting to Judaism. You're not going to become Hindus or Buddhists. Christianity is kaput. I mean, it's simple arithmetic. So Mark Collett still wants to, he's in the process of getting his party registered. I mean, can you imagine? How can you imagine not getting it to such a degree? I suppose it'll be a kind of milk cow like Britain First. Getting enough in donations just to earn a crust for its members. and not acknowledging that the system is so rigged that, well, you might as well not bother. You literally might as well not bother, because when they could have done it in the days of the NF and the BNP and UKIP, they could have done much better, but they didn't really. So unless they actually admit that the system is wrong, nothing is going to change. If you try to get your way playing by these rules, well, you're not going to get your way, because you really won't be able to get anything of what you want if you play by their rules, which they will change as the game is still in play, because they're allowed to, because that is what the doctrine of parliamentary supremacy says, that Parliament can change and repeal any law. It can pass and repeal any law that it wants, like a woman who can never make up her mind. So Parliament can change the meaning of words, such as marriage, which used to mean a union between a man and a woman. They changed the meaning of the word marriage. They're going to be changing lots of meanings of words in the future because they can. And I don't think the penny has dropped, sadly. So I think Simon Webb is capable of understanding what I'm saying. But you see, the problem is fundamentally that they have understood my answer, they have understood my solution, they just don't want it. And that's why they're cowering in a corner. So perhaps it's a problem of my presentation that I've not made it sound an attractive prospect. But then I don't think I could be expected to make something as drastic as this palatable to anyone. And I'm not going to pretend that it's going to be a quick fix. But I don't think anyone's grown up enough to deal with what I'm saying. Because fundamentally I'm talking to hypocrites, cowards, children in adult bodies, juvenile delinquents, and the mentally ill. But I'll try to make it sound palatable because, well, not palatable, but at least inevitable. If you accept that what has happened now was inevitable and meant to happen, then perhaps that will take the sting out of it. When you think about Christianity and the beliefs that Christians are supposed to hold, there's something uniquely absurd about it, isn't it? It's even more absurd than the Greek myths. And the thing is, I don't think the Greeks ever really believed in it. I mean, the great stories, the Greek myths, but they didn't believe in it. And they had no scripture. They had philosophers. Well, the problem with philosophers is that they grow old and they die. And well, once you're dead, you'd just be another dead person who cannot any longer trouble the living. And so when you think about it in these terms, the wisdom of dead white men, or dead wise men, I should say, can only be continued if expressed through an omnipotent, immortal, supreme, and eternal being. So whether you think man was created by God or God was created by man, the necessity of obeying the laws, either of an all-knowing God or of dead men who somehow managed to produce the scripture, that is the Torah and the Quran. Well, that is the only way to regain control of, by saying that you're going to choose a moral system and you're going to stick to it. And you're going to choose a moral system that is a book of rules that everybody or most people have heard of, whose wording is not disputed, whose principles are clear, as well as, well, long-standing and ancient. Otherwise, it'll just be changed by your corrupt and incompetent politicians whose morals are completely unregulated. Because Parliament can pass and repeal any law, and this means your corrupt and incompetent politicians can change the meaning of words, including the meaning of marriage. And the Fourth Estate can pretend that everyone supports it, or that anyone who doesn't is evil or stupid or mad. What makes me think that what I do would be more effective than the political parties, the fringe political parties that have been established, that have come and gone? Well, I think I am determined. I think I am clear. I don't think I've compromised on any principle. I'm not going to back down. Unlike the others who can't even discuss these ideas, they just pretend that their pathetic little solutions are somehow going to work. Now let's go through what does Nick Griffin actually say? Can you think of any solution that he has proposed? Yes, he still says move to the country and have lots of babies there. You proles stuck in your tower blocks in your cities. You're certainly going to just find enough money to move to the countryside and find somebody to marry you. And absurd. He has no solutions. And that's why they always fall back on blaming Jews. It's easier to blame Jews because most people don't like them, and therefore they can all agree that they must be, if they're doing better than you, responsible for your misfortune. But if they would only consider the absurdity of Christian beliefs, they would know that the problem is the moral system, the official moral system of Anglicanism. The fundamental problem of Anglicanism is that its church was created only to be a creature of the state. So that's why Henry became his own pope. That was what he did. You know the Constitution, the monarch is the head of the Church of England. Otherwise, it would have to be the pope. And that wouldn't do for Henry. So it had to be the monarch, and every subsequent monarch had to be an Anglican too. He certainly couldn't be Catholic because that wasn't the whole point of establishing the Church of England was to avoid being told anything by the Pope in Rome. So what is really the problem is that the British are faced with operating a moral system that is completely unsuited for a republic, because we might as well be a republic because because we're not a monarchy. The Queen has no power. She doesn't tell us what to do. She does as she's told. This woman who never passed a single exam, who never went to school, who I think she's just been around for such a long time because she's always done what she was told to do by her courtiers and her advisors. Imagine if she disagreed and refused to read the Queen's speech. Well, that would be the end of her. Well, what is the purpose of the monarchy now when being a monarch actually gives you fewer rights than your subjects? The Queen does not have freedom of worship, and nor does anyone expecting to succeed to the throne. And if you want to have sex with a 17-year-old female in London, you have to pay millions of pounds for it and be treated as if you were a Californian or a Floridian. So there is no advantage really to being royalty now. And so the institution should be abolished. Yes, I know. Christianity, democracy, monarchy. Feminism. Is there a fifth one? Yes, representative democracy. They all have to go if you want to solve your problem. So to recap, the problem, as I see it, is representative democracy, the fact that the British still think they are a monarchy, feminism, no-fault divorce, civil partnership, gay marriage, so many things that are fundamentally wrong that nobody is able to discuss. Very disturbing when you think about it, don't you think? Not only can't they discuss it with me, they can't discuss it with each other. So the conversation between Joel and Richard Spencer was very disappointing indeed. Joel only restated the problem. That European Western identity didn't seem to mean much. It only meant a passport. And I'm saying you can't have a religion. You can't have a national identity without a religion. It's almost impossible. What about countries that don't have religion, such as communist countries, such as China, for example? Well, officially anyway, the Chinese believe in dialectical materialism, which is actually not that hard to believe. It's not that hard to believe that all these ideas floating around and people attach themselves to these ideas and then fight with each other for ideological supremacy. But eventually, with all this thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, a worker's paradise will be reached. Not perhaps within our lifetimes, but we're progressing there. That's the idea. But that's not hard to believe. And if your leaders are reasonably competent, then you go along with it, right? Not so liberalism and not so Christianity. Since Christianity was really created to support the divine right of kings, and it failed for the first time in 1649, when Charles I lost his right to keep his head. And then there was the American Revolution, which was another rejection of monarchy and Christianity, and again in the French Revolution, and again in the Russian Revolution. And then two world wars. I don't know if anybody is capable of taking this conversation further. I mean, ideally, there would be a national conversation and everybody would be talking about this. But because I'm being deliberately suppressed by the algorithms, 3 people watching now, a perfectly simple idea that is based on truth and logic is not going to be propagated. But then it is true, that Quranic verse that says, God will not change the lot of a people who do not change what is in their hearts. I suppose the Jews would call it Shuvah, which is a return to God, or some expression of repentance. And it doesn't appear that atheists and nihilists are anywhere near that stage of admitting that they were wrong. It's not just they themselves, but, their parents, their grandparents, their ancestors. I make it 102 generations of Europeans who were forcibly converted to Christianity and then indoctrinated into remaining Christian with the practice of heretic burning until this was given up in 1697, when the last person to be executed for blasphemy was, what was his name? Thomas Aikenhead. And then 79 years later, there was the American Revolution, and then the French Revolution, and then the Russian Revolution, and they were all rejections of Christianity and monarchy. But the penny still hasn't dropped yet in 2022. I don't think it's actually that much to ask or to expect that people would be discussing these ideas, except that I guess the people posting now in the chat are I was going to say not educated, but I see a bit of Latin. Very good, that's reassuring. I've got some new people. How nice to meet you. Junkers G38 with his Mother's Day greeting. Obviously an American. In Britain, we have Mothering Sunday, which is, I forget now how many Sundays before Easter Sunday. And I suppose I should end by saying I do think I'm actually the thought leader of the alt-right, simply because nobody else has any better ideas that are even vaguely viable. And listening to Joel Davis and Richard Spencer talking, it is clear that they're clueless. I know Joel wants to go with Catholicism, but you can't go with Catholicism. The only way it worked, and when it worked, it was enforced by law. Look up the Edict of Thessalonica. It wasn't just non-Christians who were oppressed, different kinds of Christians, Arians, and, well, the other varieties of Christians were also persecuted. So if you want to use that, it's very, very high maintenance indeed. Oh yes, I forgot to say how this could be made more palatable. So according to Theodicy, the Theodicy of Leibniz, who proposed that we live in the best of all possible worlds, because the Abrahamic God who is omnipotent, omniscient, and perfectly moral, would create for us, his creatures, the best of all possible worlds. So although we don't find it to our satisfaction, it is still the best of all possible worlds. And even if we don't know how exactly, it still is the best of all possible worlds. And how this is actually so, we may not find out within our lifetimes, but eventually we will. I think that is the idea. So if we could look upon it as an analogy to, well, a timeline of the beginning of humanity to the end of humanity, and I suppose we have to assume that all things come to an end. It might begin again. But the point is, if the history of humanity is a timeline, we should think of it as a movie that has a beginning and an end, and we unfortunately can only see a little bit of the show, maybe a few frames, metaphorically. So we won't know how the story ends. We might be able to deduce how it will end, but we won't know for sure. So if we are to assume that humanity will carry on for a lot longer, then 2,000 years of Christianity isn't a lot of time at all. And if we are to accept that it is a spent force, and it is a spent force because it was really cooked up by mortal and fallible men who enforced the narrative on the subjects of the emperor, then it becomes clear how easily these things can be done, if done by force, if done by law, and then sanctified sanctified by time and tradition. I've already explained to you why. If we're going to choose any religion, we should choose one that has a book of rules that comes from the highest possible authority, and indeed the supreme authority of the universe, if he exists. And even if he doesn't, it's still the best possible guide. It's the best available guide to humanity, and if you disagree, then find me a better guide. So I think I've won all the arguments, really. If people won't acknowledge that I have won, it is only because of their intellectual dishonesty and their moral cowardice. They don't want to be the first to acknowledge that my solution is supreme, because I don't think there's anything else that is more antithetical to what we have now than what I propose, which is a one-party theocracy, and I will not resile from this proposition. I don't know why people might be sentimental about all this. After all, they never believed in Christianity. If we are victims of a practical joke, I think we can get over it, can't we? We can dust ourselves off and reflect on the effect of pride and denial about something that should be perfectly obvious by now. Am I surprised at the resistance to my simple solution, which is for well, the good of everyone, really. An interesting story I read on Wikipedia again was the biography of a certain Jon Snow. He was the one who he was a doctor who discovered the cure, well, the causes of cholera, because at the time nobody knew what it was or how it was spread. It was a waterborne disease, and he basically went around telling people that it was the water pumps that caused it, and they just ignored him. They ignored him and ignored him and ignored him. It was extraordinary. But anyway, he made his point in the end. But the vested interests who ignored him. I'll find that link for you. Jon Snow, English physician. Died 1853. And I think that's all I'm going to say. And I'll sum it up again. I have to keep summing it up, just to make sure people get it, which is that I am indeed the thought leader of the alt-right, because nobody else has a solution. They're just whining about problems, but refuse to acknowledge the validity and the soundness of my arguments, because they think they can. But that is a sign of intellectual dishonesty and moral cowardice. If I'm right, it doesn't matter who I am. But they're not able to discuss these things publicly. I don't know if they discuss it with each other privately. They're welcome to steal my ideas. I don't mind. And I see here, there, and in other places, the signs of little borrowings, shall we say. And this pleases me. It is going at a snail's pace, but it can be quickened. Because once you know that something was meant to happen, that what you regard as your misfortune was written in the stars, then I think you will accept it more readily and deal with it more quickly. Once you know that a solution is to hand.